I'm happy to announce that we have with us Dr. V.S. Hegre here today, and he has co-authored the book Digital Highways. You can pick a free copy of this book from the registration or from the SIA booth where, Dr. Hegre will be available to sign a copy. Thank you. Please take your seats. We will be starting with the next session now. In this session, we will be discussing the spectrum asymmetry problem. Can regulatory design preserve competitive markets in the next generation satcom? With India opening its satcom market to next generation operators, spectrum policy is becoming a decisive factor in shaping competition. This session explores how licensing models, pricing strategies, and regulatory design can create market asymmetries, influence investment confidence, and determine whether India's SATCOM framework remains both innovation driven and competitively sustainable. I'd like to invite the chair for this session, Mr. Sudhir Gupta, board member, SIA, former secretary, TRI, moderator. I would like to invite the moderator, Mr. Ashok, GV, Partner Allied Law Practices, the speakers for the session, Dr. Abha Yadav, Assistant Professor, National Law University, Delhi, Ms. Sukhraj Kaur, Analyst, Analysis Mason, Mr. Vishal Mathur, Managing Partner, Vishal Mathur Consultants, LLP, and Mr. Rajdeep Singh Gohil, Director, Sales, Middle East, Central and South Asia, Asiasat. I request all speakers to keep their remarks concise and within the allocated time. I now hand over the proceedings to the moderator. Thank you.
Good morning to one and all. First of all, thank you, SIA-INDIA, for this opportunity to address what I think is a very relevant and very important topic, given the news about $1 trillion valuation that happened a few days back. Just a very brief context setting. I think when we talk about SATCOM, there's an economic angle to it, there's a security angle to it, and then you have the law that has to address both. So we have today an excellent panel of diverse experts from different domains, and the idea is that we can touch upon some of the very important and relevant themes that will be very crucial for the regulators as well as industry players to keep in mind as the industry and the market and the regulatory environment evolves, right? So with that background, I think let's just quickly jump into the session itself. So my first question to Sukhraj. Given the fact that we read a lot about what's happening in the SATCOM, there's a lot of very glamorous headlines, but then there's a reality beyond those headlines, right? So my first question would be for you in terms of who are the real players in SATCOM market today in India, and where does the genuine demand lie?
Thank you. Am I audible? Thank you, Ashok. So, yeah, Indian SATCOM market is at an inflection point. In headlines, we see things like Starlink, D2D, IoT, but largely the market is still a B2B market, which is capacity constrained, right, and also regulatory restricted, right? And this has influence on how the players are being introduced in the market, how the new entrants are coming. So largely the market has three layers. We have capacity owners like traditional geo players, LEO players, and then we have the service integrators, which are integrating these solutions for maritime market, enterprise, backhaul, VSAT, and then lastly we have the distributors, the telcos, ISPs, and now increasing MNO partnerships, right? So this is the player landscape. Then second thing is where does the revenue lie? The actual revenue, there are three main sectors. So we have government, defense, and strategic connectivity, which is driven by mission critical demand. Secondly, we have enterprise and backhaul, which means rural connectivity, cellular connectivity, enterprise networks, which is anchored by reliability rather than pricing disruption as of now. And lastly, we have the mobility sector, which is aviation as well as maritime, right? Where tremendous growth is being seen, but also at the same time, it is controlled by service integrators. And then you talked about the hype, the headlines that we read. There are three other sectors which we see more in news, but less in terms of revenue. So that is consumer broadband, Starlink-like connectivity, which is capacity driven, but right now still regulatory and pricing concerns are there. Then we see information around D2D, which itself is a new technology, but also the monetization for the technology is still evolving. And lastly, we see IoT and M2M, large scale potential, but low ARPU and still gradually scaling. So, yeah.
So would I be right in saying then that the consumer demand is a $1 trillion question?
Sure.
Okay. So I think the demystification of the market realities brings us to a very sobering question, right? Demand is there. There are a number of players, some bigger, some smaller, but it is getting a crowded space, right? And oftentimes in the space law circles, what we don't do enough of is to look at disciplines of law that can otherwise affect space. And that's where I come to a very important topic, which is competition law. Professor Yadav, given your strong background and expertise in competition law, right? You heard a gist of what the market is and what the economy is. What does competition law have the tools to kind of regulate the environment the right way? And would you be able to reflect on what some of those tools can be?
Thank you so much for having me here, and a very interesting question, because I think competition law per se is being seen or questioned a lot of times as the answer to some of the regulatory problems, which can be very market agnostic. Now, competition law itself is market agnostic, so we will find competition law concerns in almost every market. And since we are in the space law area here, it's a very interesting question to ask and to answer, because market concentration is, of course, absolutely inverse to competition itself, market competition. So for a regulator and a competition regulator, when to regulate and how much to regulate becomes a conundrum. Do you regulate at the starting point, where India particularly is at a stage where we are talking about ease of doing business, we are no longer in the license Raj, we've opened up our economy post LPG 1991, liberalization, privatization, globalization, and then I think we are in now, if I may say so, competition law also for that matter, and our economy for that matter, in almost 2.0 phase, wherein we are saying that, look, we need competition, but again, then there are issues of sovereignty, right? There are issues of making sure that there is an egalitarian market, and that brings me to the second part of your question, which is that what are these tools that we are talking about? So what does competition law tell us? It tells us about a market which is, like I said, egalitarian. It does not have any barriers to entry. It has a pricing which is a very fair pricing. And so consumer welfare, while it is said to be one of the goals of competition law, what we do not and cannot forget is that competition law has to be fair to all of its stakeholders. So not just the end consumer, so to have the lowest prices of, let's say, any kind of a data plan or any kind of a telecom plan. The goal is not to have lowest price for the consumer. The goal is also to have a sustainable market for all other stakeholders, which is all of you and me in the framework and ecosystem of space industry, the space industry, so to speak. So for us to survive, if we are industrial players, and if for us to survive, it's extremely important that it's a competitive market. Now, where does that lead us? That leads us to a space which is not oligopolistic, the market which is not oligopolistic in nature, the market, of course, which is a utopian, perfectly competitive market. And how do we ensure that? So I think for that, competition law has to come in to make sure that there are enough players, there is no monopoly that is created, there are no oligopolistic tendencies which are there. Now, then we come to the scaling of it, that has competition law and the CCI as a regulator. Now, I will not, I refrain from answering, that particular part of the success or not of the Competition Commission of India. However, we've seen recently, if I were to make some sort of, a wake-up call, or, we've seen what has happened in the aviation industry. It was a very largely oligopolistic tendency, which did not do well in the last parts of the last year. We saw the Indigo fiasco that happened. So naturally, a market failure is what any regulator would want to avoid. So I think this is a great starting point to bring in conversations of competition law within the space sector, and to already, and I congratulate this panel as well as this the Space Congress, to bring in this important question that we are discussing here, because if we start thinking about it right now, with some very important international players coming into the Indian market, privatization happening within the space sector, if we as stakeholders of the ecosystem at least start thinking on some of these issues, we will not face, hopefully, a market failure, which is the sort of a deathbed, or may I say, a clarion call for any regulator or any ecosystem. So that's my opening remark, and I'll be happy to share more thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a quick follow-up question, and perhaps we can summarize the answer in one sentence if possible. Hypothetically, is it possible for regulations for an industry to itself inadvertently create dominant positions for certain players?
Well, self-regulation, this is not a question on self-regulation, but self-regulation will creep in, because what we expect from the industry is to make sure that competition law concerns do not arise. So you have enough self-regulation, meta-regulation happening within the industry. So the answer, straight answer, if you put it in black and white, is a yes. But the hope is that that should not happen. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So that, I think, brings me to the next question for Rajdeep. We are talking about the critical question of market access. Now, you represent an industry operator, right? Where do you see the question of, in what direction is market access traveling from your perspective in India?
See, first, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts. I'm sure there are a lot of equal experienced guy who might echo my thoughts or might have different opinion. But as an operator, okay, no operator like controls or regulation in the market. They want an open access. So the beginning of the operator is that when you put a regulation, an operator see this as a bottleneck, right? And we have witnessed in across the region, ITU 1, 2, 3. Each country is coming out with in-country policy making, and that is creating a lot of traction for those regulations, right? Like we have witnessed, we have a new space policy in 2023. Similarly, there are policies which Indonesia or Bangladesh or a lot of emerging countries follow, which is to secure their sovereignty and sort of give market access based on their long-term goals. So coming back to India, I think fair enough, India has its goals and they want to set up the future horizon aligning with the policy. So when, as an operator, when I see it, I definitely see that there is an opportunity and then there is a challenge in both the things. So if I look at from putting fit in my own shoes, Asiasat is someone who has been providing services since 1990 in India. In fact, we're the first one to start the broadcasting service in 1992 with Z. And now, all of a sudden, with this implementation, our market access has been completely restricted. In fact, with effect of 1st April, all of the C-band customer whom we have nurtured over last 34 years has all gone. Why? We don't know, right? So when you look at from our perspective, we don't feel good about it at all. But at the same time, if I look at the other operator who has got the access, it's a fantastic market. They've got a windfall revenue, and they know now they're limited access, so they are retaining the prices and the high, right? So if you look at from, there's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, so if you see from the operator's perspective, it is good and bad both. But we, as an Asiasat, we always look at from the aspect of my end user, because we survive if we see that there is a technology, there's a business case for my end user. So I believe it is not good for my end user, because we would rather want them to have more options so that it creates more competition and more choices, and ultimately it balances the price in the market. So I think it has both the side from my outlook personally, yeah.
It's interesting from an operator's perspective. You're saying that I would want my end users to have more choices, right? So that's a. I wouldn't have expected an operator to say that I want to give up my monopolies in favor of a more competitive market.
Everyone loves monopoly until they have it. Okay, that's the reality of it. But now that we are out and we see our customers going to the other operator, we receive the feedback, right?
Understood.
So there are definitely challenges, but at least now they have a lot more realization that now what was that service used to be, which was sort of norm,
Understood.
right then. Yeah.
Understood. And talking about market access, there was an article in ORF of a certain brand of terminals, which was meant for a European customer in an ongoing conflict, finding its way to the hands of northeastern rebels in India. Right? So oftentimes, I think regulations can, on paper, say we will not allow you inside except with our consent. But I think technology has a way of traveling across borders, independent of who's kind of protecting it at times. Vishal, I come to you. I think we heard the picture from the point of view of the operator. I want to take a slight bit of a step back and look at the larger picture. Right? Now, you have a rich experience working across different industries and different brands, and you understand the satcom market very well. Right? So, with your global exposure and experience, how do you think India is regarded with by multiple satellite operators as a market to enter into?
So thank you so much, SIA, for giving me this opportunity to be on this esteemed panel with my fellow panelists. So absolutely, yes. So most of the global satellite operators today view India as a very strategic market rather than an optional market. But the key differentiator here is one is the demand attractiveness versus the investment readiness. So when it comes to the market attractiveness, we have already surged because of the population surge, huge demand in rural broadband services, maritime, IFC services, defense, modernization, various government requirements. So the key question which a global operator asks before entering India is that how long will it take to secure the approvals? That's one. The current spectrum policy, the spectrum will that be a constant, and how long will it take? Will it be constant, the policies, for 15 years time, because a satellite is built for a 15-year lifetime. For a micro geo, it's about 10 years. So is that the policy constant? So these are some of the key questions. The good news here is that the space reforms have been set up by InSpace, and we have a space reforms NGP policy, NGP2. So that has been, to that extent, has been solved. So now the thing is, as a satellite operator, next step is to inject confidence in the satellite operators, the global operators, in terms of whether these policies remains constant over a period of time, whether there is a transparency in these policies. So this is the next step which we do. So eventually, predictability is what the satellite operators are looking at. India has got a huge demand, there is an opportunity, but predictability of the policies is what the global operators are looking at.
Sukhraj, I come back to you with my second trillion-dollar question. Right. So we've kind of seen a trend amongst some of the big players, right, where the entire value chain for a SATCOM mission, from the launch capabilities to being able to eventually operate SATCOM assets, right, there has been an effort to consolidate all of that, right, by certain players. So given the recent developments of Starlink kind of getting the valuation that it has and SpaceX being a sister company and everything else, do you see the market tilting towards one or two large vertically integrated operators? And is that a matter of capacity, capital, or distribution?
So yeah, that consolidation is happening, but it's not merely due to satellites or the number of satellites or just the satellite life cycle itself. Because satellite is one component of the ecosystem. If we look at the entire chain, other roles are played by both distribution capital as well as capacity, right? So from distribution standpoint, specifically talking about India, who has access to customers, players, other players of the market, as well as local partnerships plus local licensing is the real moat of the market right now. And second thing is access to capital, because you need that for launch, all of those things, but you also need that later for terminal procurement, for actually implementing that connectivity on the ground level. And lastly, capacity, yes, but not raw capacity. Like the global market has evolved, same has happened in India. Customer is not looking to buy just raw bandwidth. They are looking for integrated solutions which caters to multiple needs, right? More like managed services solution. So all of these things play a role in the overall, building the overall connectivity ecosystem. So yes, we focus on, again, the headline thing, a lot on vertically integrated one or two players, and we think that it has happened, so that is the next best thing for India as well. But because of a different landscape, there are different players at stake, and a lot of local, local specific things that are happening where partnerships play a key role. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. So I think when we talk about large vertically integrated operators potentially entering into the market, I think one question that arises is what happens to the customers, what happens to the pricing, right? And we have seen in instances where a SATCOM player has become so big that they can practically dictate foreign policy towards certain conflicts. Now with this background, I again come back to what I think could be a panacea for all these concerns, which is competition law. So to address potential predatory pricing, right, there is no cost benchmarks that are well understood. So how does competition law address this, or is it too late for competition law to even intervene?
I think, in my opinion, competition law has to be around for sure, because the terms that you used are extremely relevant terms for any market, and specifically for this particular market, because these are huge spaces. There is a barrier to entry in terms of the structure of the industry itself. You cannot create a space, industry or sort of, an entity in a matter of days. So for that matter, it becomes extremely important for the regulator to make sure that there is no foreclosure of the market. Now, when we say foreclosure of the market in competition law, we are also looking at vertical, upstream and downstream integration, which I think, as my co-panelist mentioned a few minutes ago, is extremely important in the space industry sector, because when we are talking about vertical foreclosure, what are we saying? We're saying it occurs when a company that dominates the upstream market, that is manufacturing or supply of any product, any service, it uses that power to crush competitors in the downstream market, which could be the final product or services, it could be an ancillary service, etc. Now, we know that without taking any names from the industry, we know that a particular recent entrant into the Indian market, it dominates the upstream market by launching rockets, but it also owns another operator, ancillary operator, which operates in the downstream market. So because the ownership of both the upstream and the downstream markets are consolidated, naturally it has a huge competition law concern. And this is a concern because then you're not allowing local operators to grow, you're not allowing any other further entries into the market, and so sort of you have monopolized, you've allowed the monopoly to proliferate. And that becomes a huge concern. So as we say in competition law, you don't have to look at, immediate gains of pricing for the end user, immediate gains of, your contemporaries being all right with your liberal policies because you've just entered into the market and you're not, fiercely competing because you don't want to be seen as a predatory competitor. But sooner or later, when you are comfortable in your market, when the regulator also doesn't have any more options, you're going to spread your wings and you're going to say that, look, now I'm the monopolist, the market is dependent on me. Look at all of our search engine market, look at across the world, not just in India. So those are going to be futuristic concerns, even if they are not present concerns. And I think that is something that we need to relook both as, industry stakeholders, as regulators, as consumers. Because again, India is a very price-sensitive market. So today as a consumer, I may be very happy and my data costs are the lowest, my telecom costs are the lowest. So I'm a happy consumer. But what is the after effect of that? When, so zero price markets are all around us. Zero price markets have ripple effects that we are an educated, crowd over here. We are an educated audience. But there are people who do not realize that when the price is so low, then you're the product. As they say, that when there is no pricing to the product, then you are the product. So in that sense, what I feel is that these are very pertinent questions to ask right away when the market consolidation has just begun, rather than asking them at a later point in time when you have no options in the market. Thank you.
So earlier the better in terms of when competition law kind of intervenes in the field, right? I come to a connected question of price. Pricing is directly correlated with the amount of capital that's gone into the product or the service itself, right? Now, when operators have committed to capital in the long run, all right, how does regulatory predictability affect the company in terms of the capital commitments? And what does it do for your pricing strategy when the regulatory predictability is a question and not an answer?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, at present, as we see, the pricing has gone haywire completely. If I talk to a couple of operators, it just does not make a case for them to launch satellite. If you look at the pricing, and I can go in India, I can go in around countries also, South Asia. And we were just talking about the market access and the competition law and the volume, how the India market. India is a volume-driven market. And therefore, traditionally, in other than space, everywhere it has derived a very low price and high volume. Unfortunately, in the space, there has been a supply, but now with the regulation coming in places and with the advent of a lot of K-band has come up, high throughput satellite, and now the LEO is coming. There's a complete chaos. Because to an end user, they're looking at an application. They can achieve that application using a LEO satellite. They can achieve that using a high throughput satellite, or they can implement it using the GEO satellite. So now, when you ask me, I can answer you from the GEO perspective, that it is incredibly challenging as such, even if I consider it open market, to prepare a case, because most of if I don't talk about the global operator, as global operator is already consolidated, regional operators are all busy with their board, convincing them to finance for the satellite. And I can name 2, 3, 4 satellite operator who are still struggling for a replacement of the satellite, right? And I was talking to my friend Donald yesterday about Astranis, right? Because they have a very creative model. So if you look at, operators are now looking at a small satellite in a different creative model. Why? Because they can't justify the kind of pricing level that has gone for the KU band, C band, and Ka band. So it is fundamentally very challenging for today operator to commit for at least for Geo for 15 years. So when it comes to the regulated market, then it becomes even more challenging, right? That you do not have visibility for 15 years or 18 years. So it becomes even a little bit more challenging for the operator. And also because of the advent of new technology and application driving, right? So I mean, just to give you a relevant example, that traditionally satellite, C-band, linear TV channels has been doing phenomenal, right? It still does when it comes to critical application of sports and OU. But a lot of distribution that were happening on satellite has also moved on IP of earlier to the fiber and now on IP. Why? Because the IP has become more reliable. Earlier people used to laugh that, are you crazy? Why would I rely on IP because the quality of services? But now because of the IP, it has completely changed. So tomorrow, if the broadband and the internet becomes a lot more reliable, then it will take away application from satellite, and therefore it will even further deteriorate the case of replacement satellite. And I think stock market is one of the biggest thing, because in my previous avatar, in 2005, 2004, I used to sell a lot of satellite to the brokers. Immediately they moved on to the broadband for the, the brokerage services. So it's no more there. Same thing is happening with this. So I think it is becoming ever more challenging. With regulatory, it becomes even more challenging.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you for that. Vishal, I come to you. With all these dynamics, right? The market dynamics are changing, the economic dynamics are changing, regulatory dynamics are evolving. Right, so from the perspective of foreign players or any satcom operators, right, how are they, kind of looking at market entry and go-to-market strategies for the Indian subcontinent?
Good question, Ashok. So basically, 5 years ago, if you see, the trend was that all the major satellite operators used to think would look India as a standalone satellite market, right? Now they are looking India as a partnership market. So basically, it has over the years. So I see three major shifts happening in the last 5 years. All the major satellite operators are entering. They are looking to prefer entering into a partnership in India with leading telcos, ISPs, system integrators, government-facing entities. Number two, they are also looking at options to appoint local companies, LLPs, strategic alliances and partnerships with the local companies in India. And the third shift, what I have noticed over the last 5 years is that instead of selling a standalone satellite bandwidth, they are now looking at vertical solutions. So the reason being is that there is a tremendous growth in rural broadband, in maritime, in aviation, IFC, strategic infrastructure, and government, applications and defense. Of course, modernization of Indian defense, right? So all these companies are now looking at so the success would be ecosystem partnerships rather than selling standalone satellite bandwidth.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm very mindful of time. Do we have time for one more round of questions? Is any? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So we'll keep the next round of Q&A as brief as possible in the interest of time. I also want to take some audience Q&A as well. Sukhraj, I come back to you. One of the buzzwords that I keep hearing now is multi-orbit strategies, right? How do you think that's shaping competitive positioning, and what kind of operators do they tend to favor?
Yeah, definitely a buzzword, but also a lot of reality behind it. Talking a little bit about multi-orbit, it gets thrown around a lot in all of the solutions when somebody new is coming to India or somebody is proposing a new solution. But what is the underlying technology behind it is not just satellites in multiple orbits. That is not what end customer cares about, right? As an end customer, you do not care which network is providing your experience. What you care about is what kind of experience are you having from it, right? In yesterday's aviation and maritime panel, this was discussed that end customer do not care which satellite it is coming from. All they care about is that the experience is seamless. And multi-orbit is one of the components of creating that seamless experience. It also has another component of multi-network. So we are seeing LEO solutions as well, and as well as GEO-LEO or GEO-MEO-LEO solutions, right? So the end goal is creating a seamless experience for the customer. Now, who wins in, and it is not, right now it's not just a strategy, it is taken as a default by the end user customer. So whether it is aviation, whether it is maritime, they care about that you have multiple networks to rely on so that if anything goes down, they are still having the same quality of experience. So the service integrators which will be able to provide these kind of solutions which has multiple orbits, multiple networks, and then create application-specific solutions for them will be the ultimate winners in multi-orbit type of strategy market.
I think listening to all of this, I also realized my life as a satcom lawyer is so much easier than being an operator or a regulator.
I just want to add up to multi-orbit because it's a very fashionable word nowadays. But Srini is there in front of me, is a customer and partner, Tricom from Middle East. Okay, they of course have IFMC license in India also, but we are engaged with them in Middle East. Now this is a very interesting case. Okay, like Tricom, we've been providing services of Asiasat as a platform called Sailors, which was multi-orbit solution, which is LEO, GEO, L-band. And they can probably accord with me that I was told by one vessel management company, one of the world's largest vessel management company, he said first time in transatlantic they tested Starlink. He said my seafarer almost had tears in his eyes because he was making video call. He said, now this is possible on a vessel. Now today is a day where seafarers are saying that, boss, if I don't have LEO, I'm not coming on board. So that's the kind of demand that it has generated. But at the same time, because of this not having ubiquitous coverage across all the waters, they have relied on GEO. So GEO has remained. And of course, there are times where there are challenges and L-band has remained. So other than this multi-orbit, there's also a captain's requirement and the seafarer. So there's a firewall. The host of the solution goes. So as she rightly stated that it has to be supported multi-orbit with the complete integrated solution fitted for that particular organization, right? So that's what works.
That brings me to you, Professor Yadav. I think this is one of the risks that I think you were implying in the previous answer, right? Which is if you develop a certain dependence on the product or the service, today's so-called competitive pricing need not be competitive pricing tomorrow, right? Now, there are two components to what the regulator must look at. One is, of course, these kind of services coming in and resulting in foreclosing of competition. And on the other hand, they have struck something innovative. They have cracked the technology and the business. So from a competition law perspective, there's a need to balance this, right? Rewarding innovation on one side in both the business model and the product. And on the other hand, ensuring that they do not become so big that it makes it difficult for the others to survive and they end up closing shop. So how do you think competition law can kind of draw that very difficult balance?
Thank you for that question. And I think this is a very tough tightrope that the regulator has to also climb and make sure that the balance is maintained, because we are talking about industry players here who've really toiled to sort of innovate, enter into the market. And as we, when we teach and when we read about the interface between intellectual property rights and competition law, we say that they are friends in disagreement. So you're friends to the extent that you're both rewarding innovation, you are complementing dynamic competition and dynamic innovation in the market. But the moment you've become so large So, what is the criteria? And here I think you're hinting at essential services doctrine. So what you're basically saying is that you are a large player in the market, you're almost a monopoly. You own a technology which nobody else has access to. This could be because of your patent policies, this could be because you have a great R&D team. So basically you are the person who has the best technology in the market and you are a strong player in the market. And the most essential condition is that that technology is necessary for any stakeholder, any other competitor to survive in the market. Now, what does the regulator require you to do in these circumstances? Not necessarily, but what it will ask you to do is that at a fair price, share this innovation with your competitors. Now, that itself is a very painful thought, right? So that is why a regulator would not push you to that. And this is a very common practice. We've heard about standard essential patents, where for a fair price, you have to share the patent with your competitors. So the essential services doctrine is not invoked at every instance, only where it is, the necessity and it has to be invoked by the regulator. But having said that, the necessity of this is that you're trying to create a market which is competitive in nature, right? Because again, you do not want a very highly monopolistic tendency to be there. The big fish eat the small fish is a very common nature of the market, the Matsya Nyaya as it has been called in the Dharma Shastras, etc. So the big fish will eat the small fish. The role of the regulator is to minimize regulation in today's times particularly. It's a conundrum really for the regulator, how much to regulate, when to regulate, in what manner to regulate, what are the regulatory tools that the regulator will deploy. So in that sense, to watch from a distance, intervene only when required and in degrees which are optimum. Because I did hear words which completely resonated with me also, that is regulatory predictability. Now what is regulatory predictability? That I know what are my limits as the industry player, as the industry stakeholder, and I know that if I enter into monopolistic tendencies, and I'm here speaking only from a competition law point of view, but this is true for any other legal requirement. If I do not adhere to my compliances, there will be a regulatory action, as simple as that. So if that clarity is there in the market, I think it is good for you and me and all stakeholders. But the moment, and I think I'm preempting some of your questions here, but I would like to take about 30 seconds to talk about ex ante versus ex post regulation. Because the whole jitteriness in the market comes when you are pushing a market into an ex ante framework, which is where your Digital Competition Bill 2024, which has now been withdrawn by the government, has, it did create ripples in the I should say, the digital space in the country, wherein we are saying that, look, the industry is not even taken off and you're regulating the industry. Of course, we were hugely inspired by the DMA, the Digital Markets Act of the European Union, the DMCC of the UK, etc. But while it seems like a different body of knowledge, trust me, it completely resonates with any other sector, and specifically the space sector, because you have to preempt where the industry is going. You also have to preempt regulatory action, and then to see that how much should I regulate, because tomorrow you do not want to be dependent on a particular industry provider, neither as the regulator, nor as the country, nor as the citizen. Because earlier, I think before, in a very informal conversation, this panel was discussing issues of non-personal data versus personal data. We have the DPDP Act as on date, but what about the non-personal data? So I can cite a lot of examples of how AI is being trained very unethically in countries such as ours, and that data goes into training of AI and the sovereignty is completely lost. So that's a huge area that we can probably have a longer discussion on, but this is what I'd like to rest.
Thank you for that. I think what I'm also hearing is that as SATCOM regulations and space law evolves, bodies of knowledge from competition law, compulsory licensing frameworks from the Patents Act, these principles will have to inform the evolution of space law and SATCOM regulations. So until now, we had the benefit of looking at a couple of outer space treaties, ITU regulations, looking at the telecom regulations of a country and saying that, okay, this is sufficient for us to build regulations. But I think going forward, we will have to work across disciplines of law to be able to build the next generation of regulations. I come to the last question, because I don't want to make my good friend here, left in the lurch without answering this. Joint ventures and partnerships. I heard you saying that there's an ecosystem of consultants, new business verticals that are opening up thanks to the regulatory design. What is the trend that you've noticed with joint ventures, partnerships, and these kind of engagements in the wake of current regulations?
So, Ashok, global operators understands that India is a very, very strategic market. They also understand that India's sovereignty, their national priorities, security, and plus the new startups, Atmanirbhar Bharat, the way they have like Pixels and Dhruvas, So that's why partnerships becomes very key in operating this market, right? And if you see the overall ecosystem in India, now, a lot of Indian companies are coming up in terms of the manufacturing of satellite components, in terms of the launch options. So, all the global operators are very keenly looking at all these developments. The only thing is that, you can take it as a closing remark. Look, the demand is there, right? So there's no argument of the demand. The opportunity is there. The only thing is if the regulatory, becomes, certain and constant, then it gives global operators an opportunity to do a long-term investment in the country, right? There is a huge potential in our country. As I said, these new space startups are coming up. So I think global operators are fully aware of that.
Perfect. So I can see that I've been given a very, strong smile suggesting that we close the session. So I think what we have heard is some very competing interests coming together, right? On one hand, predictability means there is constant, character to the regulation. But because the market and the technology and business models keep evolving, the regulations also can't remain static. They have to also evolve and catch up. And that then affects predictability. So it is in this paradox that I think we will have to look at how all of us function, from the regulators to the lawyers to the industry players. I don't think there's any shortage of opportunities or for us to look at innovations, not just on the technical side, but on business and regulatory side as well. So with that said, I think I'll bring this session to a close. Thank you so much. And my apologies if we exceeded time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a highly insightful session. I'm sure everybody agrees. I request the dignitaries to please join us for a photograph.